My name is David Ukrainetz. I'm a lawyer here at the McKercher Law office in Saskatoon. McKercher is one of Saskatchewan's oldest law firms. It's a full-service law firm with over 70 lawyers in Saskatoon and in Regina. My practice area includes the areas of corporate commercial solicitor work and corporate commercial litigation work. Part of my practice involves working with new entrepreneurs that come to our office looking to start new businesses, and I help guide them through the legal issues that their businesses will face in getting started. And I also practice in the area of corporate commercial litigation. From that practice, I have a fairly good understanding of the pitfalls and problems that can come when businesses are not properly structured at the start of the business, and legal disputes arise with the business or with the principals of the business years later after they've started. These types of disputes can end up being quite costly in terms of time and legal costs, and can do serious damage to the business itself. Creating a business is relatively straightforward. All you really need to do to start a business is to carry on an activity with the expectation of generating a profit. In terms of how the business will operate, the principals of a business will need to initially determine the correct legal structure for the business. If you're planning to operate a business under a business name, you need to register that name with Information Services Corp, or ISC. So ISC is the electronic registrar that handles business name registration and incorporation in Saskatchewan. Once you're engaged in a business activity, you now have certain obligations associated with carrying on a business. These obligations include paying taxes, that include income tax, GST, and PST taxes, having to keep records for the business, and paying payroll and payroll remittances to the government or for any employees that you have. The three most common types of business structures are sole proprietorship, partnership, and a corporate structure. Which structure is best for an individual business will really depend on the present and then the future circumstances that that business will operate under. Factors that will determine which is the best structure include tax considerations, shielding the owners from personal liability risk, financing, and loan requirements. And then another factor to consider is whether the business will have multiple stakeholders or owners. If you operate a business as an individual and not through a corporation, you're operating the business on what is called a sole proprietorship. In a sole proprietorship, you, as the principal of the business, are personally responsible for the liabilities of the business, and the income from your business is taxed by way of your personal income taxes. In a sole proprietorship, you essentially are the business. An example of this would be a plumber, as an individual going out and getting work as a plumber and then doing that plumbing work on their own. A partnership expands on the sole proprietorship model, with the business being operated with more than one individual owner. These individual business owners in a partnership are the partners of the business. Legally, a partnership is not a separate legal entity on its own. That would be separate and apart from the individual partners. Each partner is jointly and severally liable for any penalty or loss or injury caused to a non-party from a wrongful act or omission of a partner acting in the ordinary course of business. As such, there's a certain amount of risk in getting into a partnership, as each partner may be liable for the acts and omissions of another partner. Limited partnerships can minimize this risk, but there are rules for limited partnerships, specifically rules that a limited partner can't be involved in the business activities. In terms of structure, a partnership can be an informal partnership or a formalized structure under a partnership agreement. And a partnership agreement would set out the relationships and obligations of the partners. The last business structure I'll talk about is a corporate business structure. Corporations are legal entities created by statute and have separate existence from the owners and operators of the corporation. Saskatchewan corporations are governed by the Saskatchewan Business Corporations Act, while federally created corporations are governed by the Canada Business Corporations Act. This means that there are different rules for a corporation based on what piece of legislation is used to incorporate the corporation. Corporations offer benefits of limited liability to the owners. As at law, the corporation is considered to be a separate legal entity that is distinct from the owners and operators of the business. This can protect the personal assets of the individuals that are involved with the business from liabilities that may arise from business activities. A corporate structure allows the ownership of the business to be split between the shareholders and also allows the business to maintain a perpetual existence. Corporations are taxed differently from sole proprietorships and partnerships, which, depending on the circumstances of the business, can provide certain tax advantages to the business. In the course of doing business, a business will enter into numerous contracts for the purchase and sale of goods, services, properties, etc. Each contract that the business will enter into is going to have a unique set of rights and obligations of the parties to the contract, and these contract terms will have implications on the business. All businesses carrying out business activities can be open to the business being sued in court, and this can include being sued for such things as breach of contract, debt obligations, negligence, and other torts. In the planning process, an entrepreneur is going to want to sit down and identify and minimize the specific risks to the business. This can involve doing such things as developing a solid business plan, purchasing various types of insurance for the business, or meeting with a lawyer to review and negotiate contracts. If a business does find itself in a lawsuit, having good legal counsel is important because it can minimize the risk of the business going into litigation. Typical liabilities for most businesses include paying taxes, debt obligations, and the legal obligations that come with being an employer. So if a business has employees, the business will be subject to such provisions of the Employment Act, occupational health and safety regulations, human rights legislation, common law employment law, and federal and provincial tax law. As a new employer, all of these obligations and regulations can be quite daunting. So having good legal advice can help avoid mistakes from being made when dealing with these matters. On the tax side, a business that is subject to income tax, GST, PST, payroll tax, property tax, etc. Talking with a lawyer ahead of time on employment and tax issues can help a new business avoid having to deal with the larger problems that can develop on employment and tax matters later on if they're not properly dealt with at the start. I strongly advise clients to put in place relationship documents between the principals of the business, and this can take the form of a partnership agreement or a shareholders agreement if the business is a corporation. As a question of when does one put these types of agreements in place, I believe that any time you're going into business with other individuals, it's important that everyone's expectations are set out for their role in the business at the start, and doing this by way of agreements is important. To avoid disputes, shareholders agreements will often set out, amongst other things, the identity of the directors of the corporation, how the sale or transfer of shares will be done, what is to be done with the death or incapacity of a shareholder, how insurance proceeds will be dealt with, and then finally how disputes between the shareholders will be resolved. A lease is important because it sets out the tenant-landlord relationship, and that's going to be for the space that the business will have its operations operating from. Because a lease is a contract, negotiating the terms of the lease can be very important to ensure that the business is able to operate properly in the space that it occupies. With renewal options, a lease agreement may span 10 or 20 years, and having a lawyer assist with the negotiation agreement at the beginning can avoid major problems between the landlord and the tenant later on. I also highly recommend that new businesses have other good professional advice, and this can include retaining an accountant. By talking to a lawyer can often alleviate the stresses of the unknown legal obligations that a new business will face. As a new business, an entrepreneur will be facing many unknowns and many unknown unknowns. These unknowns are often the things that are going to keep an entrepreneur up at night. But by having a lawyer look at the legal issues and taking care of the legal unknowns, an entrepreneur is freed to focus on the important tasks of actually starting and operating their business and doing the things that are necessary to get their business operations going and done properly. As such, my advice is to talk to a lawyer and to talk to an accountant right at the start of a new business in order to put a proper business plan in place.